Back then, I truly believed he was a bad person, and he felt the same way about me. That's Charles Leclerc talking about Max Verstappen in an interview this week that's genuinely rare for this sport. Two drivers who spent years treating each other as villains, now openly admitting it was never really true. It's the kind of admission that usually stays buried behind closed doors, the sort of thing rivals think privately for years, but almost never say into a live microphone, let alone volunteer without being pushed toward it by a reporter's question. Leclerc didn't stop there either. He said he'd love to battle Verstappen wheel-to-wheel in a final corner duel, and notably said he wouldn't be afraid of being his actual teammate. That's not a throwaway line. That's a rival publicly closing the door on the one objection that's quietly sat underneath almost every version of Verstappen's future we've covered, an objection nobody in the paddock had actually said out loud until now. Here's why that quote lands differently than it would have a few years ago. Every scenario involving Verstappen leaving Red Bull, whether it's Mercedes, McLaren, or anywhere else, has come with an unspoken question. How disruptive would he actually be walking into someone else's garage alongside a driver who might resent sharing it with him? Leclerc just publicly removed himself from that list. That doesn't confirm any move is happening, but it does mean one more real obstacle, personal friction with a rival who could suddenly become a teammate, has quietly stopped being one. And in a sport where team harmony has decided championships before, sometimes by margins as small as a single point, removing even one obstacle like that is never nothing, especially when it comes from the exact rival most people assumed would object loudest. Statements like this rarely happen by accident in this sport. Even framed as a reflection on the past, saying it out loud, this publicly, this deep into the transfer speculation cycle, reads like more than nostalgia. It reads like a door being left open on purpose, timed for exactly the moment the paddock is paying closest attention to every word either driver says. Okay, before we go any further, make sure you're smashing that hype button, because this next part isn't the story you'd expect. Leclerc wasn't the only person talking about what comes after Verstappen this week. Verstappen himself was too, just not in the way most headlines are framing it. Zandvoort is set to host the Dutch Grand Prix for the final time under its current arrangement, right as his own F1 future remains genuinely unclear. Given that combination, you'd expect frustration, maybe even anger. That's not what actually happened, and the calm in his actual words is honestly the more interesting part of this whole story, precisely because it's so different from how it's being sold. Speaking to Formula 1.nl, Verstappen was measured, almost philosophical, not furious. Asked what happens to Dutch motorsport after his own career ends, his answer was honest rather than dramatic. That's not in my hands. Popularity depends mainly on the talent coming up, and hopefully someone from that group will make it to Formula 1. He made a genuinely thoughtful comparison too, pointing to Germany, a country that once had multiple F1 drivers, its own Grand Prix, and a massive fan base, and has since watched interest collapse almost entirely, despite Mercedes currently dominating the sport, proof that success on track alone isn't enough to guarantee a country stays invested. His hope for the Netherlands. Hopefully, the government will also step up to the plate. Support is important at certain times. Everyone has seen what motorsport can bring. He even pointed to Spain as proof it can work. A country with consistent government backing for both drivers and racetracks, and a steady pipeline of talent to show for it. Evidence that this isn't wishful thinking on his part, but a model he genuinely believes the Netherlands could still follow if the right people decide to act on it. Worth being direct about this, since accuracy matters here. This wasn't an explosion, and Verstappen never suggested Dutch motorsport faces total collapse. That framing overstates a calm, reasoned comment into something it wasn't. What he actually did was quieter and, honestly, more interesting. think out loud about his own legacy in public, entirely unprompted by outrage, choosing his words carefully instead of reaching for the dramatic line a headline would want, which says something about how seriously he's actually thinking about this. Put these two moments next to each other, and the pattern becomes hard to miss. A former rival is publicly softening a grudge that's shadowed years of speculation about where Verstappen ends up next. And Verstappen himself is publicly reflecting on what happens to his sport in his own country once he's no longer the one carrying it. Neither moment is really about drama. Both are about legacy, about what outlasts a career and what doesn't automatically survive it. And both happened within days of each other from two completely different people, without either one needing to be prompted into it, which is exactly what makes the timing worth paying attention to rather than dismissing as coincidence. It's genuinely rare to see a driver this competitive spend a single week talking this openly about what happens after him, on two completely separate fronts, without a shred of the outrage certain headlines are trying to attach to it. That's not the profile of someone spiraling. That's the profile of someone who's already started thinking past the current contract entirely, weighing what he leaves behind rather than just what he wins next, which is a very different mindset than the one that usually gets attributed to him in the endless cycle of transfer rumors. To be clear about what we're not claiming here, this isn't confirmation Verstappen is leaving Red Bull. It isn't proof Dutch motorsport is collapsing tomorrow or that Leclerc and Verstappen are about to become teammates next season. What it actually shows is smaller, and in some ways more telling. The driver at the center of nearly every major storyline in this sport right now is thinking further ahead than any single contract decision. About relationships he's quietly rebuilt, and about a sport in his home country he knows won't automatically survive without real support behind it. Support that has to come from somewhere beyond just him, no matter how many races he wins or championships he adds to his name. So, what do we actually take from this? Not a scandal, and not the collapse some headlines are chasing. Just a driver, in the same week, saying two honest things out loud instead of staying guarded. One about a rivalry that no longer needs to be won. The other about a sport that might not survive without help once he's gone. Both revealing more about where his head actually is than any contract announcement could. Zandvoort hosts what's currently set to be its final Dutch Grand Prix on August 23rd, a date worth marking regardless of how any of this plays out, and one that will carry a very different weight for the home crowd than a normal race weekend usually does. We'll be there for it, and for whatever Verstappen actually decides to say when he gets there, because moments like this tend to matter more in hindsight than they do in the moment itself. Smash that hype button, subscribe, and we'll see you at the next one.